Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Madness and Meaning. Today, Kelly and I want to explore the idea that everything happens for a reason. I think that that is such a common saying that we hear, especially within the personal development space, within the spiritual space, and it can be argued, is it true that everything does happen for a reason? What would be the pros of believing that that's true and operating as if it's true? And what would be the potential pitfalls of fully buying into the idea that it's true, that everything does happen for a reason? And we were discussing, all of what was coming up for us inside of these ideas. And we felt that this could be a really interesting exploration. So that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. And when I came up with this topic idea, to me, it was kind of twofold. One is part of it is because it's so obvious to me that having the belief system that everything happens for a reason as a foundation to how you live life is a like mandatory key to happiness in a lot of ways because that whole belief system of everything happens for a reason is allowing us to release our judgment or our resistance or our war on reality. And as Byron Katie says, when we are at war with reality, when we're telling ourselves that things that happened shouldn't have or things that didn't happen should have, we're going to suffer 100% of the time. And I fully believe that backing. And at the same time, this phrase, everything happens for a reason, feels really watered down. It also feels like something that is just like generally thrown around a lot without a whole lot of depth or understanding of what that's trying to say in a way that sort of comes across as, I guess, positive bypassing or spiritual bypassing, where, as an example, someone might be up, like telling someone else something that they're going through, something that they're really struggling with. And they tell, the whole story and this happened and that happened and blah, blah, blah. But everything happens for a reason, right? Ha, 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 ha. you know and it just feels like in that moment they're putting a wall up against the emotional pain that is coming up through acknowledging the circumstances that they're struggling with in that moment. And so I love the idea of exploring, like you said, like what are the pros and cons? Where can you get stuck? How does believing this benefit you? What are the drawbacks to it, et cetera, et cetera.
I would love to pull back for a second and first touch on why somebody wouldn't believe that that's true and what would drive somebody to believe that that was true. And then we can kind of get into the nuances of why you would want to believe that's true and how there could be some innocent bypassing or innocent,
Yeah.
how you can be innocently limiting yourself inside of choosing to believe that it's true.
Totally. Yeah. Let's start with why someone wouldn't choose to believe everything happens for a reason. To me, the most obvious part of that is that it kind of feels like complacency in a way, like that whole idea that acceptance equals complacency. It feels like if you were to just accept that the things that happen that you don't like happened for a reason, then it kind of feels like you're giving your power away. It's like, well, then it's not going to change. Like we almost use our resistance towards reality as fuel or motivation or a strategy even to try to control our circumstances to become something different. And so I think a lot of the time, not that it's something we're doing consciously, I don't think someone is actually thinking to themselves, no, I want this to change. And so therefore, I'm not going to believe that it's happening for a reason. I don't think that's a story that they're telling themselves consciously and specifically like that. But when someone really struggles or has resistance to the idea that what happened should have happened or what didn't happen shouldn't have happened, it's probably because they are holding on to some illusion of control that they have over the situation.
Yeah, this used to be me. I didn't believe that there was a higher power in the universe. I believed that everything was happenstance and circumstances just happened as a byproduct of cause and effect. And if something happened circumstantially that I didn't expect and that I didn't desire, then it was up to me to do my best to work with that situation and prevent it from happening again. Because if I don't step up and I don't do that, then I'm just completely giving up.
Mhm.
And then I am completely disempowered, and the universe is against me. And I have to push through to make sure that I'm seen and I'm heard and I get the outcome that I want. And that's how I was showing up in my life. And so to
Yeah.
believe that everything happens for a reason felt unfair to me. And so I chose not to believe that that was true and that I had to create my own destiny and that I had to work really, really hard to make sure that if something was going to happen for a reason, I was going to be the reason.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel like this is just one small like flavor that this operating system shows up in our lives. Our resistance to everything happens for a reason is really coming from this deeper operating system that I think is conditioned into a lot of us very young, where we learn that resistance to things and judgment to things is what gets us to change them. And we get conditioned in that way a lot of different ways. Like if we're shamed for doing something wrong, then that's how other people get us to do something differently. Like our parents get us to do something differently through shame, through judgment, through criticism. Same with school. We get a bad grade. We're taught that that's bad. We're taught to have shame for that, or we're punished for that in some way. And so that judgment, punishment, resistance ends up being the strategy to motivate a different outcome. With
Isn't
sports, I'm sure it's the same way.
isn't that like, can we just stop for a second and
Yeah.
just like take a moment for how I don't think that we really respect the amount of self judgment and shame that we are taught to feel for who we are
Yeah.
from like infancy.
Yeah.
And 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 it's no wonder that we're all so hard on ourselves and so tired
Mhm.
considering what we go through from when our minds are still developing and they're at their most vulnerable.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's going to be really difficult for a lot of people to even see what we're saying with a compassionate point of view. Because for a lot of people, they don't know any different. Like they don't even realize that that is a difficult experience to have. Like them operating out of shame and self-judgment and resistance to themselves and who they are and what happens to them, etc. There's no other option. That's all they've ever known a lot of the
and
time.
and it can serve you quite well.
And I'm glad that you're mentioning that as well,
Yeah.
because we can talk all day about how it doesn't have to be that way, and we can motivate change and live positive lives and evolve in our lives from a place of being kind to ourselves and self-love and self-compassion. But that is kind of bypassing the truth, which is that a lot of us have learned and received lots of evidence in our life that that way of operating is productive. The negative, self-critical, shame way of operating in our lives is productive at creating outcomes that we think are good, for pleasing people, for getting ourselves out of trouble, for creating some markable level of success or security or confidence or love or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's an important part of your human experience. I don't know if you can experience unconditional love without knowing what conditional love feels like first. So I think
True.
one lends itself to the other, and it's just a stepping stone. So I don't see it as necessarily bad. I just like to validate because when you said that, it was like, oh my God, like we're receiving
Yeah.
grades where we are compared, sometimes on a bell curve, literally compared from one child to the next. And the grade that you get dictates how worthy you are of feeling love. To
Yeah.
me, that just felt very,
That's crazy.
very heavy when you said that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that you pointed that out just so that people have an opportunity to see that experience that they grew up with some compassion for their younger self and the impact that that would have had on them without them even realizing it, maybe up until today, listening to this
Yeah.
episode.
So I don't think that it's a surprise that to think that everything happens for a reason when we're brought up in that sort of an environment. Like, of course, we're going to want to depend on ourselves to get the job done because that's what we were taught to do.
Yeah.
And it can
Yeah.
seem silly to leave it up to the universe, leave it up to chance when you can take control and create your circumstances.
Totally. Yeah. And so then why would someone want to operate under this belief that everything happens for a reason?
I think that there's a giant exhale after years of feeling the pressure to make shit happen for yourself, to be able to take your foot off the gas and your hands off the wheel and surrender and know that there is a higher power that could be supporting you and that you don't have to force everything always. There's something comforting inside of that belief system that I think is very appealing.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's also a lot of relief in this idea that you can't get it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
How
After
much
a
of our
lifetime of being
stress,
told that you're wrong quite frequently. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So much of our stress is in trying to avoid the wrong outcome, right? The wrong outcome of our career, circumstances, relationship, our health, our bodies, et cetera, even small things like a conversation or did I get the raise or not? Like we're just constantly stressing out about one outcome happening that we can label as wrong. And in the world where everything happens for a reason, that inherently means there is no wrong outcome. There's nothing that you could do wrong or that could wrongfully happen. And that is a huge weight lifted off of our shoulders.
But it can also feel really irritating depending on which
Yeah,
paradigm you're living in.
sure. Yeah,
I
speak
I
to that.
I can see certain people in my life feel this like weird like twitch every time every time I venture into kind of like the woo like self-love kind of conversation because they just don't feel that it's justified. They've worked too hard for too long and they want to own the effort that they put in to get to where they are. And if you
Sure.
say everything happens for a reason, it takes that hard work away
Yeah.
almost and undermines it. And that can
Yes.
feel really frustrating.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ego loves to be validated in its hard work and its earning and its
Yeah.
deservingness and worthiness of things
Yeah.
in a
Like if
typical
I was
way.
going to have this life anyway, then what did I work so hard for?
Uh-huh.
Right. And I think
Yeah,
that's so justified. And I don't necessarily believe that that's really how it works, if I'm being honest. But that could be interpreted that way.
totally. Totally. Yeah. I mean, I've played with this a lot and we've talked about in our podcast before. I've shared the story of when I did that experiment years ago of like just what how would I live if I knew that I had no control over the outcomes of my life?
Yeah.
And that was so rewarding for me, but I was ready for that because I was so exhausted from controlling my life or trying to control the outcomes of my life that just leaving it up to whatever's going to happen is going to happen anyways. If I try or if I don't try, it's going to happen anyways. Like choosing to live as if that was true, even though I didn't know if it was true, but it was kind of just like, what if it was? How would I live differently? It was such a relief for me. It allowed me to rest, which I so desperately needed at that point in my life too. But I can definitely see even like a month prior to that point in my life and any time prior to that moment when I made that decision, I wouldn't have been ready for it for that exact reason because I was so attached in my self-worth and my sense of self was so attached to how hard I worked and what I was doing to contribute to the outcomes of my life.
Can we just for a moment, sort of for fun, explore how it is true that everything happens for a reason and where it could be seen with evidence that it's not true?
Yeah.
I was trying to contemplate this before our call. Like, what is the evidence that that is true? Because we're told that a lot, but we're
Hmm.
just sort of told to like blatantly believe in it.
Blindly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally.
So I don't like to do that. I like to find proof and evidence for myself so that I can determine what I believe. And so I was thinking to myself, how could it be true? Like, what is some evidence to show me that it is true? And the way I really see it is that, I mean, one, it's true if you believe it. Ultimately, we create our reality based on our own thoughts, belief systems, and feelings. And so it's both true
Yeah.
and not true depending on who you're asking. But let's say
Yes.
for the individual that buys into the belief system that it is true, well, your circumstances are sometimes, I'm getting there, are sometimes a byproduct of your choices, right? And everyone is always making choices all the time. You're making choices according to what you're thinking, how you're feeling, which thoughts you're buying into, and which action you're taking, who you're surrounding with yourself with, where you're going. Those are all choices. And every choice you make lends itself to an outcome. And the outcome is a byproduct of the choice you make. And therefore, it did happen for a reason because you chose it, right?
Hmm.
If you find yourself inside of a circumstance that just happened, not as a byproduct of your choice, but as a byproduct of someone else's, then it did happen for a reason because they chose it and you chose to be in the vicinity of that situation. So you could kind of look at it that way, right? And then I was thinking, well, what about like the weather? Let's say it rains on your wedding day and someone says everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
You can't control the weather. And so I was trying to poke holes in this argument to see where I could find some. And I was like, well, how could you say that that happened for a reason? Well, I think, again, it depends on how you choose to see it. Do you want to be able to find peace and ease inside of that moment in time, despite a circumstance not going your way? And if the answer is yes, then you can choose peace and ease despite the circumstances and then say it's happening for a reason. It's happening to show me
Yeah.
how to choose my experience of me. And so there are ways to buy into it, and there are ways to say, oh, you're just trying to justify it,
Yes.
right? And I think that that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think that when it comes to how do you prove it's true, that everything happens for a reason, I think part of how you prove it's true is that you just can't prove that it's not true.
Right.
And you can argue it. Like
Yeah.
we are really good at arguing and
Yeah.
coming up with evidence to support that things shouldn't have happened the way that they did. Like it shouldn't have rained on my wedding day because my dress got wet and because the pictures would have been better had it not rained and because we paid all this money and things got ruined and because people flew all this way and blah, blah. Like there's a lot of reasons we can use to try to justify and prove it, but it doesn't end up being like matter of factly proven because it's like, well, how do you know that that money shouldn't have been wasted? Or how do you like there was purpose to that. It taught you to let go of your attachment to how things need to go when you spend money, which might end up helping you later in life or for another circumstance that's going to
Right.
help you grow, right? Like we can always find a counter argument to all of the evidence, quote unquote, that we find to try to support why things didn't happen for a good reason. We can argue just as well both ways.
Yeah.
And there's no proving it, matter of factly.
I think your choice to believe in it or not believe in it depends on if you perceive there to be more pain in believing it or more peace in believing it. And that
Yeah,
ultimately will dictate what you choose.
totally. Totally, yeah. And that goes back to what we were saying. The pain of choosing to believe it tends to be that loss of control or hopelessness, or the belief that if we that we'll be complacent and then we won't end up getting what we want, if that's what we choose to believe.
So that brings us to the question. It seems like there's a lot of there is the opportunity for a lot of peace and ease inside of choosing to believe that things happen for a reason because there's this giant exhale. You don't feel like you have to control things anymore. And so if you do find more peace and more ease and more levity inside of that choice, what could some potential pitfalls be that I don't think are often fully explored when we're just throwing that out there? Everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was explaining to you before, to me, it kind of feels like a defense, like someone's putting a wall up to their emotional suffering when they say that a lot of time, when they just kind of are like repeating it and saying it nonchalantly because that's what they've been told they're supposed to say in that circumstance. And it's usually coming from this place of like they're explaining something that feels really painful and um through explaining and exploring and acknowledging the circumstances that aren't making them feel good, it's bringing up all this emotional heaviness and suffering. And then when they feel that, it's like, how do I hold this? What do I do with all of this energy, all of this pain? Everything happens for a reason. Okay, then I don't have to feel it, right? It's like this dropping of the curtain on the
Yes.
pain.
Yes. Yeah, it allows you to sort of say, I'm not willing to feel the real disappointment, the real pain inside of it going this way. So I'm just going to choose to say, well, it's probably happening for a reason. And that allows me to sort of bypass what I'm actually feeling. But it doesn't negate what you're actually feeling. And so
That's
I
right.
think that it's not addressed though. Like
Yeah,
I feel like it's not validating. I feel like it's invalidating almost.
it is. Totally. It is completely invalidating and being used as a vehicle for us to suppress our emotional experiences, which is just reinforcing this very common theme in the human experience of I can't, I shouldn't feel these emotions. And I think for something like this, like what needs to be highlighted, and I think the point that we're trying to make here is ultimately that like both things can be true. When we say that everything happens for a reason, that isn't then necessarily meaning that, and you shouldn't feel upset about this. Like you should feel upset about it and it happened for a reason. Like those two things can coexist. But we tend to think that with one comes the detriment or the invalidation of the other. And
It's ironic that we tend to choose this belief system that everything happens for a reason so that we don't have to feel like we have to control all of our circumstances. And
mhm.
yet, it's being used to control how you feel.
How you feel? Totally. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And
How about it?
so go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, you're gonna say something better than me because I wasn't
And I
sure.
don't, well, what I was going to say was if both things can be true, how do you tell yourself everything happens for a reason and also allow yourself to acknowledge and feel the devastation inside of it?
Hmm. Yeah. I
And
think
what good
it's
is it to do that?
what good is it to do that? Yeah. Well, how to do it, I think, is just by simply acknowledging that that is the path that you want to choose. It's like I can recognize and consciously choose that by me believing that this circumstance happened for a reason, even if I don't know what the reason is yet, even if I can't fathom the benefit of this outcome right now, and maybe I won't for a year or 7 years or for the rest of my life, maybe I'll never be able to, but I can choose to believe that that happened for the greater good of myself and maybe the collective. And that is a belief system that I can choose to hold that will give me a lot more peace and levity in this experience. And simultaneously, there's still a part of me that doesn't like it, and that that's okay, and that that isn't wrong, and that I don't need to get rid of that part of me, but that is just energy. It's just emotion, it's disappointment, it's sadness, it's grief, it's regret, it's shame that is just coming up, and it's passing, but I have to let it pass. And letting it pass requires me to be in it, requires me to feel it, requires me to open myself up to that experience rather than closing off because it shouldn't be there because everything happens for a reason, quote unquote. Choosing that those two things get to coexist and finding out what that means for you and how to practice that.
What I'm hearing is it's not that everything happens for a reason, it's that everything happens for your reason. And
Mm.
you get to choose what that is. You get to choose that there is no reason. You get to choose that there is a reason, and you get to choose what that reason is. And regardless of what you choose, there's an opportunity there inside of it. And again, you get to make of that whatever you want as well. So it really comes down to what is the experience that you're looking to have? And that's the experience that you will be granted or that you're granting
Exactly.
yourself.
Yeah. Because sometimes the reason is that there is no reason and it just sucks. And that's what's needed.
I think that is a lot of the time what we want is to
Yeah,
just feel the shittiness and feel
totally.
like a complete victim inside of it. And there's nothing
Yeah,
wrong with that. It feels really good.
it does.
It feels really good to let go of all of the like the reason why what's happening
Mhm.
around you is happening and to just be like, no, I'm just a victim of my circumstances. This is happening to me. And it feels really good to let the burden of that go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think circumstantially it's going to change day to day what feels better. Like what perspective feels better for each circumstance. I remember having a conversation with a client long time ago about this idea that everything happens for a reason. And I gave the analogy of like when we're stuck in traffic or like we end up hitting all these red lights and being late for something. We could hold the perspective that that shouldn't have happened, that life would have been better had I not hit the red lights and blah, 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 blah. But then at the same time, we can hypothetically also prove or come up with evidence to support that that should have happened, that you're better off because you hit those red lights. Maybe it's because you missed a, the typical one is like you missed an accident, an accident might have happened had you not hit that red light, or and you could have been hurt, or maybe you end up meeting someone because you arrived 5 seconds later, or maybe the person behind you ends up getting to the grocery store 10 seconds later than they would have if you hadn't gotten stuck in traffic, and then they end up meeting the love of their life and then having a baby, and then that baby becomes the next president of the United States and saves the world. Like we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know. And it's not, and I remember saying that to my client, and they were kind of just like, but isn't that just like gaslighting yourself? Like isn't that just kind of like living um like not in reality? And I was like, well, how is that any less living in reality than the other negative stories of it shouldn't have happened because XYZ?
You
Either
create
way,
your reality.
yeah. Either way, it's a delusion.
Honestly, we hear that a lot. You're a divine creator. You create your reality.
Yeah.
And it's true. Regardless of what reality you live in, you chose it.
Mhm.
by what you're believing. You created the belief system, you're choosing to believe in it, and you live in a reality where you choose to look for evidence that that belief system is true. And everyone is going to live their life and have similar experiences, but take completely different things away from it because they're choosing to see it one way versus another way. And so you can have two people that experience the same circumstance, but walk away feeling very different about it. And they're choosing that reality. So there is not one reality, there are 8 billion different ones. And I think that's the coolest part about all of this. And maybe that's what happens for a reason is that we
Yeah.
get to choose what our reason is and what our reality is, and then how we get to experience it and how we feel inside of it.
Yeah. We get to choose our delusion.
Yeah.
The other way, it's a delusion. We don't know. We don't know. We'll never know. Our ego will never know what's actually true and why things happened. We're always going to be coming up with our own fabricated ideas of why
I
things did or didn't happen.
I have a very funny story on this topic, actually. I had a friend text me, and her husband and her 2 young kids were traveling out of town, and they were going to do this road trip. It was going to be like a 7-hour road trip to see family. And she was texting me about how it was impossible getting the kids in the car. Everyone was fighting, everyone was screaming and yelling, and her husband were arguing the entire way, and it was exhausting and it was horrible. And then the worst possible thing happened, which is the car broke down.
Oh my God.
And the car broke down and they had to call a tow truck. And she was telling me that their plans got ruined. They had to come home. They couldn't go on this road trip. And she was telling me about how the plans got ruined and how she's so stressed out and how she's so exhausted. And I was reading her text and I was reading what she was saying, but I was
Uh-huh.
feeling something different.
Of course.
Her felt sense was relief
Yeah.
because what she wanted most was to relax.
Yeah,
And she got
totally.
exactly what she wanted.
Yeah.
And so I pointed that out to her, and she said, well, did I manifest this? Like, what does this mean? And I said, what do you want it to mean? Do you want it to mean that your plans got destroyed and ruined and that you have no control over your circumstances and you have to be upset about what happened? Or do you want it to mean that you got exactly what you wanted and now you get to relax?
Mm.
And I think she was irritated that I wasn't giving her an intuitive quote unquote answer,
Yeah.
but I was offering her options and she
Yeah.
got to choose what it meant for her and what,
Right.
what the reason was as to why that circumstance happened. And I think that that is empowering,
It
getting to
really is.
choose why what you believe and why you feel the way you do. There's nothing more empowering than that. If we were to sit here and tell you, yes, everything does happen for a reason. And if you don't believe in that, then you're wrong. Like that's
Mhm.
disempowering.
It
But if we don't
is.
have an answer for you and you get to choose your answer,
Yeah. But you can make your answer or make your decision from an aware place,
sure.
right? With the information, with the being informed of here could be the potential pros and the cons of believing this, and this is what I want to look out for. And here are some possibilities to consider when it comes to what I'm going to decide what my truth is around this. You're not just defaulting to whatever is the most convenient and automatic belief system. And I think that doing so and creating a practice and a consistency around your willingness to pop out of what's your automatic perspective and belief about what's happening, about yourself, about the world around you, and just consciously choose how you want to relate to it, what you want your perspective to be. That is such a profound practice to have in your life.
I would argue that there's always choice, even when it's unconscious.
Yeah.
I can kind of see what you're saying, and I want to play devil's advocate and see if you agree with me. I think that this is really
Okay.
interesting because there's the person that sees the options and consciously chooses one, and that's empowering. There's the person that doesn't see the options and that feels like a complete victim inside of their circumstance, but they're still choosing to continue to believe that way, even if they don't realize that there's another choice. And there's something very empowering in owning that identity.
Mm.
Am I off with that?
I'm not sure, but it's making me think of existential kink, where it's like
Yeah.
we are unconsciously choosing, quote unquote, like, because the thing that we consciously say we don't like, we actually unconsciously do like.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's
I think
something
the
to that, I think.
I think the nuance of it all might go over some people's heads. So I think by by
Which
just
is
saying
my life.
choosing,
That's fine.
yeah. Like if we can just define choosing as something that you are doing with intention
Yeah. Okay.
versus something that's happening automatically, but also calling that choosing. I think that's getting too confusing.
If you understand what I'm saying, leave us a comment that you understand what I'm saying.
Love it.
Is there anything else inside of this topic that you feel like we haven't explored that's sort of on your mind or on the periphery that you would like to delve into?
I feel like this topic, we mentioned it when we were first discussing it. There's so many rabbit holes to go down with it. Um, but there's nothing that feels really obvious to me that we haven't already discussed.
Yeah, I think what I would say is the next time you hear someone say, oh, just, everything happens for a reason, or you catch yourself wanting to choose that belief system, I would get curious with yourself and ask, but how do I feel? And can it be okay for me to believe that this is happening for a reason and also give myself permission to feel whatever's alive for me?
Yeah.
And to not be afraid to give yourself permission to feel what's there, but to allow that experience to be okay. And also know that that could be happening for a reason too, giving yourself permission to feel what's there rather than choosing to bypass it and wanting to move on to something else because it's happening for a reason and there's nothing that you can do about it. And
Yeah.
playing with that where you maybe haven't seen it before, given yourself permission to before, and seeing what that could feel like if that's a different choice.
Mm-hmm. I
And
love that.
and maybe the power inside of that, the validation inside of that, and whatever else is uncovered inside of that as well.
Yeah. And just giving yourself those little windows of opportunity to discover for yourself, like, how do I want to hold this experience? Do I want to hold it with this very elaborate explanation that I come up with in my brain about why this should have happened the way that it did and try to, find peace with the situation that way? Or do I want to be on the other side of the spectrum and just completely be a victim to the circumstance and really let myself grieve and be upset and be in resistance to it? But that opportunity that you open for yourself, that window that you open for yourself to just see that you have a choice and make it, I think is a really powerful move in a better direction for all of us.
Yeah. Can you feel the heartache and the peace at the same time? Or do you have to say everything happens for a reason so that you don't have to feel what's under the surface?
Right. It all exists maybe on a spectrum, is kind of how we
Right.
can see it. You can be on the complete opposite end of one and not even feel the peace, just feel the remorse of it all. You can be on the other end where you're kind of like gaslighting yourself into believing that everything is great and everything is awesome and everything happens for a reason. Or you can try to find yourself somewhere in the middle where it's like, this sucks and there's probably going to be a benefit to this or
Yeah.
some iteration of that.
Cool.
Yeah,
This was fun.
it was.
Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening, and we'll see you next week.